Making news in print and online this morning, and we're joined by Ben Oquist, the Executive Director at the Australia Institute. Ben, good morning.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
What are we kicking off with?
Well, this front page of the Australian Financial Review has Dean Smith. I always watch Dean, an interesting backbencher senator from Western Australia. You might remember he led the charge on marriage equality inside the coalition. But this morning he's suggesting that we should be looking at either expanding the base of the GST or increasing the rate to 12.5% as a way of boosting the economy.
Always dangerous territory to start wading into.
Yes, it is. But interestingly, he does talk about not just raising the rate to 12.5%, but expanding the base of the GST. We had an economist, Matt Grundoff, in our office look at this a little while back, and while most people think of it as increasing the GST as a regressive thing, there are some ways you can do it in a progressive way. For example, we looked that you could expand the GST education services, say private school fees or private health insurance, and you'd raise $2.3 billion a year, but most of the impact would be felt by wealthier Australians and less poorer Australians. So it's a debate that never seems to go away.
Well, that's not going to happen, is it? Because school funding's been set recently.
Well, I think that's part of the reason we haven't seen the expansion of the GST onto fresh food or onto private health insurance or into private school fees, because there's a big body of people who simply don't want it on those services. So I think you run into big political obstacles. But you can raise the GST in a fair and progressive way, not a regressive way, but it's ultimately unpopular as well.
Moving on, The Guardian has, touching on this letter from scientists to Scott Morrison. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, a piece by the environment editor, Adam Morton. 240 scientists have written an open letter to the Prime Minister ahead of what's anticipated to be the announcement of a 10-year review of the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, a 10-year review of an act that's been around for 20 years. I can remember when it was introduced. That's terrifying. But they're suggesting that it's really time that we need stronger environmental laws, that Australia is facing an extinction crisis. There's 1,800 birds and animals that are threatened in Australia. Three animals that have become extinct in the last decade, a further 17 that could become extinct. And there's this big 10-year statutory review of the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act about to happen, and they're saying we need stronger environmental laws.
What laws are they proposing? Protection of certain parts of Australia? Or?
Well, they're saying that there's been over a massive loss of habitat. So yes, you'd need to look at stopping that loss of habitat, but they're saying that simply the approvals process is essentially too easy, and there isn't the compliance and monitoring even once approvals are put in place.
Okay, we'll wait to see how that's received today. Now, Tasmania, we mentioned earlier the Mercury is providing a positive front page today. Apparently, Tasmanians pretty happy at the moment. An island of smiles is the headline.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What's this about?
The Mercury's done their own kind of future survey of readers, I think to coincide with a bit of rebrand of the newspaper today. A newspaper, if you're in Hobart or Tasmania this morning, you're finding a slightly different shape, a more compact size apparently, so a big change there.
Not postcard size, is it?
No, it's a little bit bigger than that. Anyway, this survey, a future series survey that the Mercury is running, says that 70% of Tasmanians are optimistic and 70% of Tasmanians want to stay in the state. But reading a little bit deeper, it does say...
So 30% of Tasmanians want to get out.
I guess that's the way I've looked at it.
Wow.
But if you do dig a little bit deeper in there, it does say that there's been a halving of those who are very optimistic, down from 31% down to 16%. But interestingly, there's an interesting editorial essentially from the editor Chris Jones, and they're talking about the growing pains that Tasmania is facing, that they've been going through a purple patch. But managing that growth is something that some people are struggling with. Housing shortages, I know, has been a big issue down there. How to cope with the impact of tourism and getting more people into wild places while still protecting them.
Yep.
We've got a little story in the Mercury as well that kind of is an adjunct to this, a survey from the Australia Institute that we've commissioned, a poll that says that 2/3 of the population want to see the Tarkine protected as a national park. And I guess that underscores these growing pains that Tasmania is having and this increasing threats because of so many people coming to the wild places that make Tasmania special.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Once again, I look at that figure and think, well, so 1/3 of the people that you surveyed,
yes,
are not interested in those protections.
Well, 1/3 don't want it protected as a national park. Whether they want some other form of protection or limited form of protection, the survey doesn't go into.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the Tarkine that's not yet protected from mining or logging.
Yep.
While there are obviously large national parks in Tasmania, a lot of the still wild places don't have that formal protection.
Okay.
Cool. Ben, last one. Netflix. These big companies, honestly, they are making so much money and so many question marks still about the tax that they're paying.
Yeah, another story in the Financial Review saying that Netflix has only paid just over $300,000 in tax in Australia, despite an estimated income of $600 million to $1 billion, or 0.04% to 0.06% in tax. And it's such a big player in the Australian market. This story suggests that they've got over 5 million subscribers and paying so little tax. And I think that's it's going to be...
So where are the loopholes for them?
Well, they've got some kind of a subsidiary in the Netherlands, apparently, and they're able to book the profits overseas. And I think you're alluding to this. It's a bigger question about how to regulate these players, not just in tax, but also in local content. You know, a lot of the traditional media operators in Australia have to have local content capacity and rules.
Yeah.
And these...
There's not a lot of Australian content when you go to those streaming services.
Yeah,
not enough.
Yeah, big streaming services, not paying much tax, not having the same local content requirements. I think that's going to be a big debate going forward.
Yep.
Ben Oquist, thank you very much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Thanks, Paul.
Well, leadfoots from across the nation have converged on Mount Gambier in South Australia for one of the country's only legal street racing events.